Good morning, everybody. My name is Darin Grant, and I'm the CTO at Animalogic, which, if you don't know, is now a part of Netflix Animation. The title of this keynote actually comes from a conversation, I think I see him here somewhere, I was having with Nick Cannon, the CTO of Walt Disney Animation Studios, a while back, when I highlighted that there's a very small percentage of our industry that takes on a disproportionate amount of industry-facing volunteer work. And so I hope that by the end of this presentation, I've convinced a few more of you to join us. I should start with a little bit of disclaimer. While this is a conference dedicated to the development and support of open source software and motion pictures, I myself haven't written a line of code in over a quarter of a century. So it's a little intimidating. But that's not to mean that I never wrote any code. I do actually have a little bit of street cred. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the heart of Silicon Valley in Cupertino with parents who both worked in the software industry. They even moonlit on their day jobs nowadays. I think that's called a side hustle. They were developing software in exchange for getting and receiving home computer equipment like this Altos computer on the left that I got to learn to program on when I was just 6. And yes, that's my elementary school where we literally had a robot developed by Nolan Bushnell of Atari fame, and that's me in the yellow there. So as a result, I learned, I continued programming throughout my youth because I had this great opportunity as a kid. And that's what actually got me into this industry. This is a picture of me at Digital Domain as a junior programmer in 1999. And while I learned so much and I worked so hard as a software engineer, there were hints, if you can see here, that writing code for the rest of my life wasn't actually going to be my path. And furthermore, there were even hints at an early age that maybe I was more destined for management, as this clip at that end of that news story from before will illustrate. I'll make sure I have my audio up.
And you were pretty quiet during this, Darin. Do you think you gave some directions that weren't right?
No.
No, What wasn't you?
No, I think it was Mike because he was saying all the turns.
So just like any manager, I blamed one of the engineers for our faults. So Mike Weinholz has gone on to a successful career as a software engineer at Symantec and Netscape, and even formed his own company, but he's never, ever forgiven me for that. I swear I'll show you why all that background is important, besides just for laughs in a bit. But back to the value of serial volunteerism. The message I want to convey to you all today is pretty simple. I believe that continually volunteering your time and energy to support this industry in particular, it's the only one I know, provides you with growth and opportunities far beyond what you'll achieve within the context of your day job. And so the important part here, the cheat code, is that you need to make industry volunteerism actually a part of your day job, a theme that I think we're going to hear throughout a number of different presentations today. So I know I'm preaching to an audience that's very open to hearing this message. I mean, you're all here on a Sunday morning. But it's not just because of that, though. It's because you being here shows that you have a love for this industry beyond the norm. And with that said, I'll note that while this is a very big audience, we're in the hundreds here, not the thousands. So it's important that each of you consider contributions and taking my advice for the sanctity and future of our industry. Okay, so why should you actually listen to me? I'm not your manager, although some of you I am. However, I have been an industry volunteer for over 2 decades. I started in 2001 with SIGGRAPH, even running the business symposium going all the way to Shenzhen, China. I've been a long-time volunteer for the Visual Effects Society, even the Content Delivery Security Association, the Academy SciTech Awards, and of course, the Academy Software Foundation, where I've been a participating member since its foundation in 2018. And I've managed to do all of this while I was fully employed. So what's the unlock code to doing that? Again, it comes back to this statement: making industry volunteerism a part of your day job. And while volunteering is a personal commitment, trust me, supporting volunteerism is actually a corporate and management commitment. And since I've been both in my life, I've been able to volunteer and pave the way for my teams to do the same over my career. So what we're actually going to cover today in 2 main sections: my personal journey, yes, there's more about me, I'm sorry, and then the journey of my employer, Animalogic, whom I love, and for all the support that they've given to me and our teams in participating in the industry. And I'll close with a little bit of call to action for why you all should do the same. Okay, personal volunteerism. So again, here's this eye chart. I'm just going to highlight 3 of these experiences today. My experience with SIGGRAPH, the Academy, and the Visual Effects Society. For each of those, I'll highlight the barriers to entry that might prevent all of you from thinking that you could do this thing that I've done. And hopefully I'll convince you to overcome that barrier by articulating some of the lessons that I learned along the way, not just me, but our companies, and then some of the benefits that I've received as a result of this extra work. Okay, so I'll start by talking about my very first volunteer experience. As a 2001 SIGGRAPH Talks reviewer, and I said sketches. I don't know if Andrew Glassner's in here. That's your fault. He named sketches back in the day. It's now called Talks. And the reason I had this opportunity was a fellow volunteer, Doug Roble. Now, you may not recognize this guy. You may recognize the 2-time Academy Award-winning, TED-talking, DigiPro keynoting, Journal of Graphics Tools editing, Dr. DigiDoug, Douglas R. Roble. But back in the day, it was just Doug. And Doug and I shared a cubicle wall. And as you can probably tell, because I'm a little loud and extroverted, he also knew that I had a great passion for this industry and all the technology within this industry. And so he suggested me as a reviewer for SIGGRAPH. So I don't know if Doug's here today, but thank you very much for all you've done. And so being young and stupid, I leapt at that opportunity without considering the actual commitment. Back in those days, for SIGGRAPH, reviewers actually reviewed every single submission that was brought in. And in 2001, that was over 300 submissions that took about 20 minutes each, assuming you actually knew the area that you were the subject matter that you were reviewing. And so I know I'm trying to convince you all to join and participate, and that might scare the hell out of some of you. But first, I'll tell you that with SIGGRAPH, it's gotten a lot easier now. But second, the lesson I learned from this is that when you say yes, you've just got to fully commit. And that took so much time and effort, but doing a fulsome job and doing the whole job and not cutting corners is so much more valuable. And I'll talk a little bit about why. So first, I was getting to look at a very wide gamut of submissions from all of computer graphics and interactive techniques. And I had to apply my narrowly focused VFX brain at the time to that broad range of computer graphics. And learning about all those new areas helped me consider a much broader impact of those techniques and how those techniques could apply to my little subsection of my day job. And then, if anybody's been a reviewer, there's the review part, but then there's the active deliberation that comes afterward, right? Arguing about, well, I reviewed it here and you reviewed it there and what's going on. I was just 27 years old at the time, and in the room with me were the authors of books that I had studied in college, like Brian Barsky and Ed Angel. SciTech Academy Award winners like Doug, he did have one SciTech at the time, and Carrie Phillips, who I think is on the call. Paper authors like Holly Rushmeyer, and people who would make Shrek come to life like John O'Gibbs and Gru DeBry. And I had to defend my reviews against these people from whom I had a deep admiration. And doing that, and defending and being able to articulate and defend my thoughts and my opinions, it was really hard because, honestly, I won't say who, but some of them were kind of jerks. But it really taught me a self-belief and a self-reliance and confidence that I still maintain today. And speaking of those folks, while we all came from different aspects of the SIGGRAPH community, we shared a sense of service. In fact, from my early days of participating in SIGGRAPH, I think 7 of the last 20 SIGGRAPH conference chairs came from just those first volunteer sections. So again, you'll see this theme of serial volunteerism. When you start out and you start participating young, you'll see that you have this opportunity to contribute greatly throughout your career. Ultimately, participating broadened my horizons and opportunities beyond what I ever thought I would have had, or what I definitely would have had just sitting at my desk all day long, and eventually led to my new role at PDI DreamWorks. Okay, next, I want to highlight my experience volunteering for the Academy. So I've been helping investigate applications for Scientific and Technical Academy Awards for almost 20 years now. And it all started because of this guy right here, Ray Feeney, and he asked me to. And while I highlighted Doug's amazing career, there are a few people who have contributed more to CG and film than Ray Feeney. If you look at all that list of stuff, I'm not going to go over it because it's embarrassing, but he's amazing. But looking at both of their careers, you'll see a theme. They've all been volunteering throughout their entire career, and because of that, they've really been, they've been able to shape the industry. And that's really a trait that you'll find. The more that you volunteer and you participate, you become a leader in this industry. Now you may wonder why Ray picked me to join that committee, and oftentimes I've wondered myself, and I actually never asked him. But in prepping this presentation, I think I found a clue in that photo. There you go. So participating in SciTech each year takes over 100 hours of time, over a period of time that kind of starts right about now in the year and ends in November. In the early days, we even had to pay for our own flights to travel to and from different studios to look at their demonstrations, and traveled biweekly to the academy to meet in some secret star chamber, private in-person meetings. So while the time commitment was just like SIGGRAPH, there was a new barrier to entry for me there, and that's imposter syndrome. I think somebody mentioned it in an earlier presentation. It definitely holds true. Again, I was just 30 years old at the time. I think I may have been, this is not a brag, I think I may have been the youngest ever participant and one of the very few that did not have a SciTech award themselves. And while SIGGRAPH reviewers were certainly intimidating, there's nothing as scary as speaking your opinion in front of folks that invented computer graphics and film, like Ray himself, like Ed Catmull, Richard Chong, Richard Hollander, Rick Sayre, and others. But speak up I did, and was so pleased to find out how supportive all of these individuals actually were. Ultimately, a number of these people have given me guidance and advice throughout my career, not because they managed me, but just because they appreciated my volunteerism. So it's a good lesson to learn. Now, one other very special piece about these SciTech investigations that's different than a review is that you actually get to talk to the people who have made something amazing for our industry. And by talking to the inventors themselves, I learned more about our craft in areas that I never had the opportunity to discover on my own, and it broadened my horizons even more. And then after that, we all have to write a report and recommendation to the Academy. And in writing those reports on those innovations, I learned how to tell a story about why something technical matters to the creative arts. And this is important not just for anybody that's a manager out there, certainly a manager in a studio environment, but it's also important because as a manager, it's our job to promote and highlight the excellence of those in our charge. But it's important for anyone who wants to promote their own ideas too. So being able to tell a story, communicating, so important. That's what SciTech taught me. So all of those things I do think led me to becoming a better manager. My current employees may completely disagree with that, but my former employees, including Jason Iverson, who asked for a shout out up here, can certainly attest to how bad I used to be. So, and finally, there's the Visual Effects Society. I'll speak just about my early experience there as an officer of the New York section in 2016. I just moved to New York to support my then partner's career, and I knew nobody and nothing about the city. I was a California boy. I was a bit intimidated when there was a call for participation, an email that came out to ask for people to volunteer for section officers. But I pushed through that, and I put my name in the hat and won a seat, because there weren't that many people actually volunteering, as it turned out. The lesson there is that you should never be afraid to offer your services and your assistance, because the worst thing that could happen is somebody says no, and the best thing that could happen is you could get exposed to so much. Being a section officer not only made it easy for me to make new friends and meet people and contacts within the industry, because we were hosting these pre-beer parties, but I was able to figure out who was driving things locally, and based on their involvement in local events and presentations, and figure out a way to navigate through the local industry. Ultimately, overcoming that barrier to participating in a new environment has allowed me to do the same in any situation, whether it be a new city, a new job, or a new industry. So that's enough, it really is enough about me, 13 minutes about me. So let's talk a little bit more about company volunteerism and the effort that you can make on a company side. And we'll look at that through the lens of Animal Logic. Many of you are here based off of the good graces of your company, sponsoring you. And to those companies that have sponsored your arrival here and also who sponsor the Academy Software Foundation, I do extend a deep sense of gratitude. Thank you very much for that. So I'll talk a little bit about this from Animal Logic. I think that each of those decision makers that have decided to send you here, myself included, understand what I'm about to say. But for the future leaders and decision makers out there, I hope that explaining the recent history of Animal Logic's commitment to open source and industry participation inspires them to do the same. I'll use the same format that I did before, of barriers, overcome, lessons learned, and the benefits from that. And even though I'm talking a lot about Animal Logic, because that's most of my career here, I will say that as we're part of Netflix Animation, they've been incredibly supportive, just as Animal Logic was. So, Animal Logic had made some contributions to open source software in the past, but really, ALUSD Maya was our first open source project on our own. This effort was led by Owen Murphy, architected by Rob Bateman, and supported by their boss at the time, Guy Griffiths. None of them are still at Animal Logic, so I'm speaking on their behalf. Animal Logic had started to design and build its own scene description library called CSD, Common Scene Description, when Pixar publicly released USD in 2016. The team made the observation that USD was a far better baseline to start from, having been the basis of Pixar's pipeline for decades at that point. However, Pixar used Maya in a very small portion of their pipeline, really around set dressing, and thus the example code provided, I'm looking at Guido now, and that's intimidating. The example code that they provided to bridge USD into Maya was fairly simplistic and insufficient to support a company like ours that had a full Maya-based animation pipeline. Is that right? Yeah? Okay, good. Yeah. Thus, Animal Logic developed our own bridge between Maya and USD, conveniently called ALUSD Maya, which we then open sourced in 2017. Now, the barrier here was a new one. Animal Logic's co-founders had long been in the business of selling software at this point. I mean, long. Some of you may not actually realize this, but there's a connection between Animal Logic and Discrete Logic, the company that made Flame that was eventually sold to Autodesk. They built that and sold that to some folks in Montreal. After that, they built their own compositing tool called Eddy and sold that for a while, and even marketed a couple of long-standing bridges between Softimage and RenderMan, and Maya to RenderMan. So now we're asking this company to completely shift gears of profiting from this and give the software away for free. Luckily, and this is not me, this is Guy Griffiths, so all credit goes to him. Guy was able to make some very clear and compelling arguments about the value of releasing this tool as open source, allowing us to create the software with open sourcing in mind from the beginning. That was a key insight because it enabled a number of benefits. First, because we knew it was going to be public, it put pressure on the team to make it look good. There's nothing, when guests are coming over, you got to clean up your room. The team upped their game in relation to the quality of the code, the comments, and documentation. It's because they knew everybody was going to see it. And it was our first entry. It also allows us to be very transparent about our plans with Pixar with Pixar and other studios. That transparency and openness led to lots of amazing discussions and feedback, Spiff and others, which improved our approach, even including code from our friends at companies like Blue Sky and Lumen and others. So during this time, Guido, right there, was the head of R&D at Pixar and was a true champion of USD promotion throughout the industry. His advice to Animal, at the time I'm told, was that if we wanted to help steer the direction of USD, we needed to put some skin in the game. Don't just ask for things. And that was spot on, and it really gave Animal Logic, in particular Owen Murphy, a seat at the table for USD discussions, including leading several working groups at SIGGRAPH around USD over the years. And finally, USD was exciting, but adoption was still pretty nascent in 2017. By releasing this plugin, I think that Animal helped accelerate Autodesk's engagement with USD, resulting in an announcement in 2019 that we'd be ending our active development of that tool set in favor of investing in and promoting Autodesk's efforts. And earlier this year, we were finally able to announce that we fully internally migrated off of our own system onto Maya USD. So thank you, Autodesk, for taking the charge there. Next up is our release of the USD A Lab, which I think a lot of you are familiar with. We did this initially in 2021, and this is a trailer that we put together in 2022 for our second release. Some of you may have seen this before, but I just wanted to share this trailer again that's produced and directed that we produced, and it was directed by Grant Freckleton for the second, much larger version. Here you go, because it's kind of funny.
This is pleasant. This is not pleasant.
So that was a fun project, and kind of as a sock puppet, kind of tongue-in-cheek poking fun at like some of the high-quality animation that we see today, because it wasn't about the animation, it was about the asset itself. I want to make sure on USD A-Lab to give credit where credit is due. A-Lab wouldn't be here if not for the significant efforts of Aiden, Jens, Christian, and Grant. A-Lab was actually born out of frustration. Now I'll start by saying I'm not a lawyer, but I've had plenty of them tell me what I can and can't do over the years. That came out a little wrong, but what I really meant is that one of the challenges that Animal Logic and any independent studio has is that, or even software vendors for that matter, is that while we create amazing imagery and amazing assets for our studio partners, they don't actually belong to us. We can't use them. We can't make them. We can't share them in presentations. We can't use them internally for training unless we get lots and lots of permissions, and that's where the lawyer comes in saying no. So whenever we wanted to make an external presentation, getting those permissions to use that production content was incredibly challenging. And also, you might not even realize this, but it's challenging internally too. You want to make training material. If you make it for one project, another team may not be allowed to see those assets, and it's a mess, right? So this particularly ground the gears. That's an Australian slang thing I've learned. That ground the gears of our head of production technology, Aiden Sarsfield. He proposed that we internally create a set of assets that were free of any intellectual property constraints, assets that we could use for any purpose without any legal limitations, which was great, but then he actually went further and said, well, why don't we just open source it? And Disney had released the Moana Island, but no one had ever done this for USD before, and not nearly as permissively as we were talking about. So at the time, we were one of the primary studios leading the pack in terms of USD adoption. And while the industry is growing, the blessing and curse of USD is that it's flexible enough to be able to define an asset in many different ways, and the particular schemas and approach to using USD varied between different studios without a clear production quality asset to motivate concepts and alignment in the industry. So we said, hey, this is a great opportunity to do both. But the barrier here was that this wasn't code, right? I mean, we had done that, and lots of people had done that, but it was production content. And as you saw, it involved a lot of assets, a lot of production management, and a lot of legal. We had to check every asset to make sure that we weren't violating someone else's intellectual property. The lesson that we learned here is it was simple though, in that doing something outside of your comfort zone, like releasing a first USD production grade asset, can reap some really great rewards. And if you don't know already about A-Lab's success, which again, given that you're here on a Sunday morning, you probably do, but here's some fun data that I got from Academy Software Foundation. Since its release, A-Lab has been downloaded over 7,000 times, which it's a huge asset, so that's a lot of S3 transfers. The graph on the left displays the number of downloads per asset and the DPEL in the digital production example library just this year alone. And as you can see, A-Lab has been the most popular asset in our library. And another huge benefit, only partially expected, was that the adoption of asset by many different projects, both open source like Gaffer and USDView, but also by commercial software partners like Foundry, Autodesk, and SideEffects. As it turns out, having real production assets to use to share information and test their products is incredibly valuable to all of our ISVs. And by releasing A-Lab, we were able to ensure that our version, our schema of USD, was at least supported by all these third-party products and renderers. So I mentioned that it took a lot of folks a lot of time to make this happen, many more, in fact, than most open source projects. As evidence, this is the credit list for that A-Lab trailer that I just showed you. And if you're fast and you look at everything, you may notice that there's not a single engineer listed there. This was a way, A-Lab was a way to allow non-engineers to contribute back to the industry. Something that's a little bit unique and something that I think we're trying to explore across the board in ASWF, but it's so important because it really energized a whole new portion of our employee base. Everybody wants to contribute back, and just open source could limit how you're doing that. So further, well, we initially released A-Lab Phase 1 and Phase 2 as a gift to the industry for Animal Logic's 30th anniversary. That also happened to be during COVID. Working on this ode to our company at that time when we were all isolated and talking about its history, there's a lot of deep history embedded in this asset. It was really joyful, and it really brought our teams and our company and our culture back together during a time of isolation. And as evidence of some of that joy, take a look at some of these Easter eggs in the A-Lab that you may not have seen unless, like Mike Johnson, you have scoured around all the details of that asset. For those of you who have been in production for a while, the names and themes of some of these board games may be painfully familiar. Estimate to complete. Yeah. All right. So, and then in classic fashion, I was raised in Cupertino, home of Apple Computer, so I have one more announcement, one more thing about ALAB. As mentioned, today we are announcing the release of ALAB 2.2.0. Thank you, yeah. So to date, all the contributions to the ALAB have been made completely by animals, by animal logic. And that's because you can't really create a pull request or fork an asset. I mean, you could create an asset that's a fork, but that's a whole different thing. So we worked with the DPEL, the Digital Production Example Library, TSC, and most importantly, Matthew Lowe from DreamWorks, who I saw out here, who's our TSC chair, who helped us migrate the USD portion of ALAB into a Git repo, and that's available today. So with this, anyone should be able to make a PR or a fork for the asset. We want to encourage people to do just that. Fix our stuff. Suggest changes to our asset schemas. Fork and share your own asset schema with approaches for your assets so that we can look and combine and compare and talk about them. Do anything that's allowed by our very permissive license. We also produced a new technical asset variant, which allows you to use the asset without all the very heavy fur and cloth data that we include as well. And the final example from our little company, Animal Logic, is to talk a little bit about how we've promoted a culture of participation and volunteerism at the studio. So Animal Logic was a 33-year-old company founded in Australia with offices in Sydney and in Vancouver, British Columbia. I joined Animal Logic in 2018 as the company's very first CTO. And while through my volunteerism over the years, as I showed you, I had a wide breadth of knowledge and information about many studios, I knew very little about Animal Logic and all the amazing technology and teams that they had produced, except for the films that they had produced, like Happy Feet, Legend of the Guardians, and the Lego movies. And there's actually a reason for that. There's this thing called tall poppy syndrome. I was very unfamiliar with this concept as an American, but evidently it's rampant in Australia. This is hard to believe to my fellow Americans here, but evidently it's basically the idea that telling people how awesome you are is discouraged. I mean, how un-American is that? But that was very much something embedded in the culture there. And so coming in, I'm like, oh my God, look at this amazing work that these people have been doing for years. You also note that with the projects discussed in the areas I'll talk about in a minute, Animal Logic's visibility has raised in the industry a bit since 2018. At DigiPro yesterday, hopefully a number of you were there, I can't count the number of people who stopped me in the hallway to compliment me on the volume, quality of our presentations and the presenters themselves. And while as an American manager, I took full credit for all of that, the truth is that all of this happened completely due to grassroots efforts within the company. And I'll admit that I've done my part encouraging, much like I'm trying to encourage you all now, to think broader and clear the decks for any industry participation that we might do. And that the success of ALUSD Maya and the success of ALAB have also further encouraged people to push further. But the truth is that all of this stuff happened, all the great things that you see, participation from Animal Logic that happens today, has happened due to grassroots efforts from the teams themselves. We have an internal speaker program called Techfinity, where anyone with an idea that they want to share can sign up for a slot and present back to a very incredibly supportive internal audience and get feedback in order to continue their effort. And so I think that's, as I was thinking about all the compliments yesterday, I think Techfinity and those kind of efforts internally are exactly the thing that help to promote and make our teams so good at what they do. Our contributions are not just in presentations and publications either, but if you do want to see any of those, we push all of them on our website. We also have a number of leaders chairing conferences and industry-wide discussions. Valerie Bernard, Liviu Constantinescu, and others have built reputations across this industry because of their willingness to lead. And also, because of the Academy Software Foundation, we've been able to encourage and participate so much more contributions and leadership on these different projects. The structure of ASWF has made this easy, and our participation has grown significantly as a result, probably with some of those commits that David showed in the slides earlier. And I want to do a special call out to the teams, or at least the team, who's made accommodations for those of us who are in the APAC region. Time zones are yet another barrier to entry for us, for industry volunteerism, and your efforts to do time zone shifted meetings so that we can attend are very much appreciated. So that's almost all of it. Oh my God, I'm almost on time. So what am I asking you to do? This is just a call to action. I hope I've driven home a few points today. Really, just remember that serial volunteerism isn't just for engineers, it's for everybody in our industry. It expands your knowledge and your interests because of your participation and meeting people outside of your day job. It exposes you to mentorship opportunities that you'd never have and job opportunities that you'd never have. It broadens your community. It builds confidence and leadership skills. And then finally, it provides opportunities to participate in and drive the future of the industry. So what are you waiting for? Just do it. Thank you.